All right, everyone, I'm going to continue my conversations about phrasal verbs. I've made a few videos already, introduction to phrasal verbs, and then a video on transitive phrasal verbs that you can separate. This video is about transitive phrasal verbs that you can't separate. It's a little bit shorter, but as a review, a phrasal verb is a 2 or 3 word verb. And in this case, I'm talking about verbs that show actions. So sit down, turn off, right? Write down. These types of verbs, actions that have 2 words usually. And the first part of it is the verb. And then the second part is this thing called a particle, but it looks like a preposition. It just doesn't act like a preposition. So in this video, I want to focus on the transitive phrasal verbs. And again, transitive is just a fancy way of saying that the verb has an object after it. And by object, I mean a noun. A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. Or an object can be a pronoun, and pronouns are words that replace nouns. So I'll show you some examples, but just to review this part with the pronouns, we're talking about object pronouns. So object pronouns are the ones that come after verbs. So like I is a subject, but me is the object. You is the subject and you is the object too. He is the subject, but him is the object. She is the subject, her is the object. They is the subject, them is the object. We is the subject, us is the object. So these are examples of object pronouns. We also have it. Okay, so when I say transitive phrasal verb, I'm talking about the type of verb that has to have an object after it. So for example, I can say, write down my name. Okay, so write down is the phrasal verb, that's the verb, and my name is the object. And in this case, it's a thing. So it's just a noun, but lots of times you need to have a thing, something after a phrasal verb. I can't just say, yeah, write down. No, write it down or write down my name. It has to have something. But in some situations, some verbs, you don't need to have an object. And those verbs are called intransitive. I'm not talking about those in this video. I'm talking about transitive phrasal verbs. So transitive phrasal verbs mean, right? That means that these types of verbs always have an object after them, okay? Now, the tricky thing is some verbs can have an object and some same verbs cannot, and then they can be transitive or intransitive, which is exciting, but don't worry about that. We're talking about transitive today. So transitive phrasal verbs, that means these verbs have to have an object after them. A thing, a person, a pronoun, whatever, okay? Now, when you have an object after them, then you have a sentence that makes sense. Now, in this video, I'm focusing on transitive phrasal verbs that you have to keep together. Sorry, you have to keep them together. You cannot separate them. I just did another video on transitive phrasal verbs that you can separate if you want to. You can also keep them together. Okay, so transitive phrasal verbs that are separable, that's the other video I did. This video is about transitive phrasal verbs that are inseparable. You have to keep them together, okay? So I'm gonna call it inseparable phrasal verbs. Okay, all right, here we go. So let me give you some examples. Settle on, look after, and stick with. Okay, so these 3 examples, these 3 phrasal verbs are examples of inseparable phrasal verbs. So let me show you why. Let me make a sentence with them. We need to settle on a decision. Okay, first let's analyze this. Settle on is the verb, the phrasal verb we're using here. And then a decision is the object that comes after the phrasal verb. Remember, these are all transitive phrasal verbs. That means they have to have objects after them. And this one, settle on, does. We need to settle on a decision. I cannot say we need to settle on. I can't. I have to say something after it. Okay, so we need to settle on a decision. Okay, now I can say we can settle on a decision. And here you see the phrasal verb is not separated. It is together. With separable phrasal verbs, you could rewrite it and say we need to settle a decision on. You could do that with separable phrasal verbs. However, you cannot separate these ones because they're inseparable. So even though I wrote it out, it's wrong. I cannot put that word between settle and on because it's inseparable. It's not correct, okay? So you can't separate that one. You can't do that. You have to leave it together and say, we need to settle on a decision. Now, this is the fun thing. If you watched the other video that I made on this topic of phrasal verbs that you can separate or not separate, I said that when we turn the object into a pronoun, so here we have a decision. What is the pronoun of a decision? It. So when we turn that noun, the object, when we turn it into a pronoun, then we have to separate the verb. So I said that in the last video. We can't leave it at the end. So then in that case, I would need to say, we need to settle it on. But I can't. I can't put the pronoun in between the phrasal verb, right? I can't do that. Why? Because it is inseparable, okay? So in this case, if I want to use a pronoun as the object, I have to say we need to settle on it, okay? And that sounds totally fine to me. It's completely correct. But just remember, I said in the other video, I said we do not put pronouns at the end of a phrasal verb. When we use a pronoun, we have to separate the phrasal verb and put it in the middle. But in this case, we can't do that because this is an inseparable phrasal verb, so just leave it at the end. Wouldn't it be nice if all phrasal verbs just followed the same rule? Yes, it would be nice. But unfortunately, that's not the way it is, and it's just something you have to learn. And yes, it's great to study these rules and learn the rules, but I recommend reading and speaking as much as you can. Okay, back to the examples. Let me show you some more examples. Okay, so we have the word look after. Oh, by the way, settle on means to make a decision or decide something. So to come to a conclusion after thinking about it a lot. To look after means to take care of something, okay? So I can say, can you look after my bag while I go to the bathroom? Can you look after my bag? So here we have look after, that's the phrasal verb. And then we have the object, which is a thing. It's my bag, it's a thing. The object, it's a noun. If we wanted to turn this object into a pronoun, the pronoun would be it, okay? Now, because this is an inseparable phrasal verb, I cannot say, can you look my bag after? I cannot put the object between the verb and the particle because this is an inseparable phrasal verb. I also cannot put the pronoun between the verb and the particle because it's an inseparable phrasal verb. Can you look it after? No, I cannot say that. Can you look it after? But I can say, can you look after it? Can you look after it? I can say that. I can leave the pronoun at the end of the phrasal verb in this situation because it's an inseparable phrasal verb. Okay, now let's look at one other example of a phrasal verb that is not separable, and that is to stick with. To stick with just means to continue with something and not give up or not leave something or someone. So I really don't like studying English. I really don't like it, but I need to stick with it. I need to stick with studying English. I need to stick with it, okay? So here's my sentence. I have stick with, there's the phrasal verb, studying English, that's actually the object in this case. It's a noun, okay? It's an activity. Studying English is an activity. It looks like a verb, but it's not. It's a gerund. Anyway, because it's inseparable, I cannot separate it and say I need to stick studying English with, right? I cannot do that. Okay, because it's not separable. I can't do that. If I wanted to turn the object into a pronoun, the pronoun for studying English is it. It's one activity, it. Can I separate it in that case? I need to stick it with. No, I can't do that because it is inseparable. So don't put the pronoun in the middle either. What you have to do if you want to use the pronoun is keep it at the end. I need to stick with it. I need to just stick with it and not give up. I need to stick with it. You need to stick with it too. Okay, so that's it. Those are 3 examples of inseparable phrasal verbs. One more thing I want to say about inseparable though, is sometimes there's situations where a phrasal verb is separable. You can separate it, right? Let me see. For example, we need to turn the light that is on in the room off. Okay, here's a better example. Where's the phrasal verb? Turn off. Look at that. Here's the verb part. Here's the particle way over here. And all of this is one object. The light. Which light? The light that is on in the room. That's one object. It happens to be really long, but it is an object. In a situation like this, with a phrasal verb that is separable, turn off is a separable phrasal verb. You can say turn off the light. You can say turn the light off. You can say turn it off. It is separable. But with any separable phrasal verb, when you put an object that's very long between it, it's not a good idea to do that because it's just too much information separating the verb from the particle, and that makes it hard for the listener to follow your ideas. So in this kind of situation, just keep it together. Just say, we need to turn off what? We need to turn off the light that is on in the room. We need to turn off the light that's on in the room. In this situation, when you have a really long object, don't separate the verb from the particle. Keep them together. And that's all I have to say about that. I recommend, again, speaking, reading. You will see phrasal verbs, you will hear phrasal verbs, and you will automatically get the meaning and the ability to use them on your own, but you need to practice. All right, I hope that was helpful. Bye-bye.